Before the lights, before the fame, there was just Benito, a boy stacking groceries in a Puerto Rican supermarket, whispering lyrics under fluorescent lights that never noticed him. They called his dreams unrealistic, too strange, too loud, too different. But difference was his destiny. This is the story of a man who refused to be silent. A story about rhythm, rebellion, and the power of authenticity. This is how Bad Bunny turned his pain into poetry, and became the voice of a generation that refused to apologize for existing. He was born where sound never slept, where the ocean hummed like an ancient lullaby, and the streets carried rhythm even when they were empty. Vega Baja, Puerto Rico, a town small enough to know your name, yet loud enough to shape your soul. In that world of narrow roads, salty air, and stubborn dreams, a boy named Benito Antonio Martínez Ocasio began to listen. Before he learned to sing, he learned to feel. The church choir was his first stage, wooden benches, flickering candles, echoes bouncing off the walls of faith. He wasn't the loudest voice, but there was something in his tone, a gravity beyond his years. He didn't just repeat the hymns. He believed them. He carried them home like invisible treasures. At night, while the island rested, Benito would lie in his small room, walls painted with posters of Daddy Yankee and VIII, his cheap radio whispering reggaeton into his imagination. The beats were more than music. They were escape routes, promises of a world beyond the horizon. His mother's voice would call from the next room, reminding him that dreams don't pay rent. But she didn't know that for Benito, dreaming was a form of breathing. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't the chosen one. He was just a quiet kid who listened differently. Where others heard rhythm, he heard rebellion. Where others heard lyrics, he heard identity. School wasn't his stage. He often felt misplaced, too quiet for the loud kids, too eccentric for the quiet ones. He wore clothes that didn't fit the mold. He loved colors, oversized shirts, strange combinations that made teachers shake their heads. But fashion for him was freedom disguised as fabric. Every odd outfit was a whisper saying, "I don't belong, but I exist." He didn't know it yet, but that defiance, subtle, almost shy, would become his armor. At home, his parents were loving but practical. His father, a truck driver, believed in discipline. His mother, a teacher, believed in education. Neither understood the language of beats, bass lines, and bars. When Benito told them he wanted to make music, they smiled the way parents do when they hope you'll change your mind by morning. So he kept it to himself. He wrote in notebooks, scribbling lines about loneliness, joy, frustration. He sang softly while stacking cans in the corner store. The world wasn't watching, but his heart was recording everything. He was 13 when he realized that art could be rebellion. Watching his island struggle, hearing stories of inequality and identity, he began to understand that music wasn't just entertainment, it was expression. It was how a small voice could echo across oceans. It was how a forgotten town could leave its mark on the map. By 15, he had a dream too big for his environment. He started uploading rough tracks under pseudonyms. They were raw, beats borrowed, lyrics unpolished, but they carried something rare: honesty. No filters, no fake glamour, just a kid from Vega Baja trying to be heard. People laughed. Some told him reggaeton was dead. Others said he'd never leave the island. But inside him, something stronger than fear was growing: conviction. He began to realize that greatness doesn't start with applause. It starts in silence, the kind that tests your will, your patience, your self-belief. He didn't know it then, but those silent nights would define him more than any spotlight ever could. While his friends chased parties and small-town gossip, Benito chased something invisible: sound itself. He studied the rhythm of conversation, the music of traffic, the poetry of everyday life. He began to think in verses, breathe in bass lines. Even heartbreak became inspiration. Even boredom became art. He once said in an interview, "If I didn't have music, I'd still be creating something. It's how I survive." That's what Vega Baja gave him: not luxury, not comfort, but resilience. A sense that nothing would ever be handed to him, and that every dream would have to be wrestled into reality. In the solitude of his teenage room, Benito created worlds. He wasn't chasing fame, He was building identity. And though his environment was small, his imagination was infinite. He drew from everything: trap, salsa, hip-hop, gospel, refusing to choose between them. That refusal would later become his trademark. No labels, no categories, no rules. In a world obsessed with boxes, he was building a bridge. But like all dreamers, he would soon learn that bridges don't just connect, they expose you. To cross one means to leave the safety of anonymity. And the moment he uploaded his first track, the boy from Vega Baja would no longer belong only to himself. When the first few listeners found his SoundCloud account, they heard something unusual. A voice deep, emotional, unrefined, filled with longing and rebellion. He called himself Bad Bunny, a name born from irony, a childhood photo wearing rabbit ears and a scowl. He took what others saw as ridiculous and made it powerful. It was more than a name, it was a philosophy. The world called him bad. He would make bad beautiful. Every upload became a declaration. I exist. I feel. I won't conform. He didn't know if anyone was truly listening, but he uploaded anyway. That act, small, unseen, uncelebrated, would become the spark that ignited a cultural revolution. Years later, when millions would chant his lyrics in stadiums, Benito would remember this: the loneliness, the uncertainty, the quiet defiance. Because greatness doesn't arrive, it grows. And sometimes, it grows in places no one is looking. Vega Baja was more than his hometown. It was his crucible, the forge where rhythm, pain, and pride melted into purpose. It taught him humility and hunger, faith and fury. It gave him the courage to be misunderstood, and the will to never apologize for it. He didn't know it then, but the boy who once whispered songs to himself in the supermarket aisles had already taken his first step toward immortality. Every sound that shaped him still echoes within him. But now, the world was about to hear it too. He stood behind the register, scanning cereal boxes and canned beans while his mind played symphonies no one else could hear. The rhythm of the scanner became his metronome. Each beep, another heartbeat of a dream too large for Vega Baja. Benito's co-workers joked that he always seemed somewhere else, and they were right. He was. In his head, he was crafting melodies, rewriting lyrics, inventing worlds made of rhythm and rebellion. But when the shift ended, reality waited at the bus stop: humid air, tired feet, and a paycheck too small to measure hope. It's strange how greatness often hides behind routine. Behind plastic bags and polite smiles, the future of Latin music was quietly planning his revolution. He didn't have a studio. He didn't have a producer. What he had was an old laptop, a cheap microphone, and hunger, the kind that keeps you awake even when the world tells you to sleep. At night, the supermarket uniform came off, and the dreamer took over. He'd sit in his room, windows open to the sounds of the Caribbean night, headphones leaking beats into the dark. Neighbors thought he was wasting time. Friends thought he was delusional. But Benito was building something invisible, a sound that didn't exist yet, raw and unpolished, just like him. He uploaded tracks anonymously on SoundCloud. No marketing, no plan, just truth. Songs about heartbreak, frustration, identity, words that burned because they were real. He didn't expect fame. He just needed to speak, even if no one was listening. And then one night, a small miracle happened. A stranger had shared one of his songs. Then another. Then another. The plays went from dozens, to hundreds, to thousands. Comments in broken Spanish and English began to appear. Who is this guy? People didn't know his name, but they felt his pain. The world was starting to listen to the boy from Vega Baja, and it didn't even know it yet. He called himself Bad Bunny. The name was born from irony, rebellion, and humor, a reminder that identity could be both serious and playful. A photo from childhood, a boy in rabbit ears scowling at the camera, became the symbol of everything he stood for: nonconformity, defiance, authenticity. He laughed when people mocked the name. He wasn't trying to sound cool. He was trying to sound real. And that honesty became magnetic. But behind the growing attention, there was doubt. The world doesn't applaud you when you start, it tests you. His parents worried. His father asked why he was wasting nights on noise. His mother prayed he would finish college and find stability. But stability was never the goal. Expression was. He didn't know it yet, but every doubt, every warning, every fear would soon become fuel. Still, there were moments when he questioned himself. Was he talented, or just stubborn? Was he chasing destiny, or delusion? He'd stare at the ceiling after another late-night recording session, exhaustion pressing on his chest. But then, he'd remember the feeling of creation, the spark that came when sound matched soul. That's what kept him alive. That's what made the struggle worth it. He once said later in an interview, "I worked at the grocery store, but I wasn't thinking about groceries. I was thinking about rhythm." That's the truth of dreamers. Their bodies live in the world, but their minds orbit something higher. And while the world saw an ordinary cashier, something extraordinary was quietly forming. He was shaping the voice of a new generation, one that didn't fit expectations, one that spoke with accent, with attitude, with pride. Then the message came. A local producer had stumbled across one of his tracks online. The voice was unique, the flow unpredictable, the emotion raw. The producer sent him a DM, "Come to San Juan. Let's talk." Benito froze. This was it, the first door, the first invitation from the world beyond Vega Baja. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew he couldn't say no. So he took the bus. 2 hours. Sweaty, anxious, clutching a USB stick with his demos like a lifeline. The studio was small, cramped, filled with cigarette smoke and the ghosts of other dreamers who came before him. When he stepped to the mic, the room fell silent. His voice, deep, thick, melodic, filled the space like it belonged there. He rapped about heartbreak, anger, confusion, ambition. Every word came from somewhere real. The producer nodded slowly. "You don't sound like anyone else," he said. "Don't ever change that." It was the first time someone told him his difference was power. From that moment, the idea of failure changed. Failure wasn't rejection anymore. Failure was silence. And silence, he decided, was no longer an option. The collaboration led to small shows, then local recognition. But success didn't come overnight. There were still months of doubt, still days behind the cashier, still whispers of "get a real job." Every time he felt small, he reminded himself that he was part of something bigger, a sound that was coming, a movement that hadn't been named yet. He didn't have the luxury of shortcuts. Every verse, every beat, every hour of lost sleep was his investment. Every struggle was a deposit in his future. He didn't know it then, but this was the final chapter of his anonymity. Every sleepless night, every song recorded in the dim glow of a cheap monitor, was pulling him closer to the edge of destiny. And when destiny knocks, it doesn't ask if you're ready. It demands that you become ready. From the checkout line to the recording booth, from the small-town silence to the endless hum of possibility, Benito was crossing a threshold. He was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to create the sound of his own freedom. He didn't know it yet, but one of those late-night uploads would soon explode and change everything. The boy from Vega Baja was about to become a storm the world couldn't ignore. The world doesn't announce the moment it begins to notice you. Sometimes it just clicks, a single post, a ripple of sound in the dark, 1,000 fingers tapping replay on a song that was never supposed to matter. That's what happened to Benito one night in 2016. He uploaded Soy Peor to SoundCloud, just like the dozens of songs before it. No label, no manager, just his voice, rough and wounded, layered over a haunting trap beat. He went to bed thinking nothing of it. But by morning, everything had changed. The track had exploded. Hundreds of thousands of streams. Messages flooding in from places he had never heard of. Miami, Buenos Aires, Madrid, Los Angeles. They didn't just hear the song. They felt it. That pain, the kind that didn't need translation. That rebellion, raw, unfiltered, unapologetic. For the first time, the world heard what Puerto Rico had been whispering all along. He wasn't polished. He wasn't radio-friendly. And that was exactly why he mattered. The song's hook, Soy Peor, I'm Worse, became an anthem for a generation tired of pretending. It wasn't about being evil. It was about being honest. Benito had turned his insecurities into a weapon. He showed the world that imperfection could sound beautiful, and millions related instantly. He didn't know it then, but this was the start of the Latin trap revolution. Soon, major labels came knocking. Executives who once ignored SoundCloud rappers were suddenly calling, desperate to understand this strange new wave. But when they asked him to change, to sound cleaner, safer, more commercial, Benito smiled. "If you want the truth," he said, "you can't sanitize it." In the studio, he was fearless. He wrote fast, recorded faster. His voice, that deep, raspy growl, carried both pain and power. He refused to mimic anyone. He wanted to sound like himself, and in doing so, he created a new language for Latin music. Every track was a rebellion, a refusal to conform, to hide, to filter. He mixed trap and reggaeton, heartbreak and aggression, faith and fury. And the kids who felt invisible, the outcasts, the dreamers, the angry, the lost, they saw themselves in him. He didn't wear the flashy chains or the polished image of fame. He wore baggy shirts, painted nails, skirts, sunglasses that didn't match anything. Every outfit was a declaration, "You can't define me." And that terrified the old guard. Traditionalists said he was destroying Latin music. Critics said he was vulgar, reckless, disrespectful. But his fans, his people, knew the truth. He wasn't breaking culture. He was setting it free. When he walked onto his first stage, the lights hit him like revelation. He didn't move like a pop star. He moved like a storm. Unpredictable, wild, real. He poured everything, every wound, every frustration, into that microphone. And for the first time, he saw what his music could do. It could heal. It could unite. It could rebel. But with recognition came the shadows. Success is a double-edged sword. The same noise that lifts you up begins to drown your silence. He started losing sleep. Fame, as intoxicating as it was, began to demand sacrifices, privacy, peace, authenticity. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Every interview, every contract, every opinion. The boy who once sang for himself now had to sing for millions. There were moments when he wanted to disappear. He'd return to Puerto Rico quietly, walk the streets at night, listen to the waves, trying to remember who he was before the spotlight. Sometimes he'd visit the old supermarket where he once worked. No cameras, no entourage. Just Benito, the boy who once dreamed behind the counter. That duality haunted him. Bad Bunny was the armor. Benito was the soul inside it. And every day, the line between the two grew thinner. But pain, as always, became his teacher. Instead of fighting it, he wrote about it. Each song became therapy, confession through rhythm. His next releases, Tu No Metes Cabra, Dials, Chambia, were raw, filled with pride and defiance. He didn't sugarcoat the struggle. He shouted it. Every verse carried a message. You don't need permission to be yourself. And that became his legacy, before fame, before Grammys, before headlines. He taught a generation that art isn't about approval. It's about survival. He didn't just break into the music industry. He broke it open. Labels had to change. Producers had to adapt. Even mainstream pop started to bend around his energy. And while the world tried to decode his success, Benito already knew the secret. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just telling the truth, loudly. He once said in an interview, "My music is for everyone who ever felt invisible." That was the essence of his rebellion, not anger, but empathy. He wasn't fighting the world. He was fighting the silence that lives inside it. From the quiet streets of Vega Baja to the global charts, the boy who once scanned groceries had become a symbol of defiance, authenticity, and hope. But every revolution comes with a cost. And the higher he climbed, the more fragile the ground beneath him became. He had found his voice. Now, he would have to protect it. Fame doesn't come gently. It arrives like lightning, beautiful, blinding, and impossible to control. For Benito, the boy who once hid behind a cashier's counter, it felt like stepping into a storm made of light. Everywhere he went, people shouted his name. Everywhere he turned, another lens waited to catch him, to freeze him, define him, own him. But fame is a mirror with cracks. What it shows isn't always who you are. And soon, the reflection looking back at Bad Bunny began to feel unfamiliar. At first, he loved it, the energy, the applause, the validation. He could finally help his family, give back to Puerto Rico, live the life he once imagined from his bedroom. But the noise grew louder every day. He couldn't walk down the street without a crowd forming. He couldn't post a thought without the world dissecting it. And slowly, fame began to ask him a question he wasn't ready to answer. Who are you, when the world already decided? He stood in front of the mirror backstage one night, staring at himself. Oversized glasses, painted nails, a jacket that looked like it belonged to another planet. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Behind the colors, the confidence, the chaos, there was exhaustion. Not from work, from expectation. Every interview wanted to label him. Every magazine wanted to define his gender, his attitude, his rebellion. They needed to fit him into a headline. But Benito refused to fit anywhere. He was the misfit who turned difference into dominance. And now, the world wanted to tame him. So he began breaking the rules that fame tried to build around him. At a photo shoot, he arrived wearing a skirt. He painted his nails black, wore pearl earrings, and walked like he didn't need permission. Some laughed. Others attacked him online, questioning his masculinity, his identity, his purpose. But Benito didn't flinch. "If I can wear what I want," he said later, "maybe another kid will too." That's when Bad Bunny stopped being just an artist. He became a symbol, a movement wrapped in melody, a rebellion against the cage of expectation. He understood something most people never do. That freedom isn't the absence of judgment, it's the courage to live despite it. At the height of his fame, Puerto Rico itself began to boil. Political scandals, injustice, inequality. His island was crying out. And instead of hiding behind his success, Benito took to the streets. He marched with the people. He climbed onto a truck and performed live during protests. He didn't sing for fame. He sang for freedom. Every lyric became a message. Every concert became a statement. He wasn't afraid to risk fans or sponsorships, because what's the point of a platform if you never use it? He realized that being Bad Bunny wasn't just about sound. It was about responsibility. But even rebellion has a price. Behind the fame, the tours, the lights, there were nights of silence. Nights when the boy from Vega Baja sat alone, unsure if people loved him or the idea of him. He missed anonymity. He missed walking barefoot to the beach. He missed being Benito. That's the paradox of fame. It gives you everything and takes the most human parts in return. He began to write again, this time not for charts, but for survival. The songs grew darker, more introspective. He wrote about loneliness, hypocrisy, and the fear of losing yourself to the image that made you. Because the more famous he became, the more invisible his true self felt. He once said, "People think I'm fearless. I'm not. I'm just tired of pretending." That honesty, that rawness, connected him even deeper with his fans. They didn't just admire him, they understood him. Because every listener who ever felt trapped by judgment saw a piece of themselves in his struggle. He broke the mask so others could breathe without one. Then came the moment that defined him not as a star, but as a man. During a televised award show, he kissed a male dancer on stage, in front of millions. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't politics. It was truth, spontaneous, fearless, human. The internet erupted. Support poured in. So did hate. But once again, he didn't apologize. "I'm not trying to shock people," he said. "I'm trying to show them what freedom looks like." And that's when it clicked. He wasn't just breaking rules, he was rewriting them. He became a global phenomenon without losing his essence. A Puerto Rican voice speaking to the world, in Spanish, with pride. For decades, Latin artists were told to sing in English to make it big. He refused. His success became proof that authenticity speaks louder than translation. Bad Bunny was no longer just music. He was movement, Sound and statement fused together. He was proof that rebellion could be righteous, that culture could be armor. But as his influence grew, so did the weight of it. The pressure to represent millions, to always be perfect, to never rest. And inside him, a quiet war was brewing, between the dream that brought him here and the world that now claimed him. Fame had given him power. But power, if not handled carefully, can become a mask of its own. And Benito, who had spent his life breaking masks, now faced his greatest challenge yet. How to stay human when everyone else sees you as a god. He would soon learn that breaking free from the industry's expectations was only the first battle. The next one would be against himself. He had broken the rules. Now, he would face the consequences. Success sounds like applause, until it starts to echo in your head. For Benito, fame was no longer a dream. It was a reality that demanded everything. Tours, interviews, rehearsals, expectations. The noise never stopped. Every sunrise came with a new camera, a new opinion, a new headline. The boy who once wrote lyrics alone in a dark bedroom was now a global symbol, living inside a schedule made of flights and spotlights. But every storm starts with something beautiful, the calm before chaos. When his debut album X100 PRE dropped in late 2018, it wasn't just music. It was declaration. It was a message to the world that Puerto Rico wasn't just a place, it was a sound. Every track felt personal. Estamos Bien was his anthem of gratitude after a hurricane that devastated his homeland. Caro challenged beauty standards and celebrated individuality. Each song was proof that Latin trap could be poetry, that reggaeton could be rebellion wrapped in melody. The critics listened. The fans screamed. Bad Bunny wasn't just topping charts, he was rewriting them. And yet, beneath the triumph, something restless stirred inside him. He was everywhere: award shows, collaborations, fashion campaigns, stadium tours. Every night, the lights burned brighter. Every morning, the silence after was heavier. He began to realize that success doesn't feel like victory. It feels like velocity, faster, louder, unstoppable. And if you don't learn to breathe, it swallows you whole. He'd perform for tens of thousands, his voice echoing through oceans of people. But afterward, in the dressing room, he'd sit in the quiet, scrolling through messages he didn't have time to answer. Some begged for help. Some demanded attention. Some just wanted him to stay the same. But how could he? Growth doesn't ask for permission. He missed the boy from Vega Baja, the quiet, the simplicity, the nights spent dreaming instead of delivering. Now, every dream came with a deadline. Every passion had a price tag. Success changes people, they say. But sometimes, success doesn't change you, it reveals you. And what it revealed in Benito was both his greatest strength and his deepest wound. His refusal to stop being human. When his next album VIII arrived, he titled it with pride, Yo hago lo que me da la gana. I do whatever I want. It wasn't arrogance, it was survival. He was reminding himself, and the world, that he would never become a product. Every song felt like a punchline to the industry's rules. He mixed humor with heartbreak, softness with swagger. And the people loved him even more for it. But with every triumph came more responsibility, more eyes, more pressure. The same system he rebelled against began to crown him, and crowns, he would learn, can be heavy chains in disguise. One night, after another sold-out show, Benito sat by his hotel window. The city lights shimmered like stars, but none of them felt real. He thought about his parents, about his island, about the silence he left behind. Was this what he wanted? Or had the dream grown too large for him to control? He closed his eyes and listened, not to the crowd, not to the fame, but to the faint echo of his own heartbeat. And for a moment, he smiled. Because he realized something essential. Everything he'd built, the chaos, the noise, the storm, had started with that heartbeat. And as long as it was still there, he hadn't lost himself. In 2020, the storm reached new heights. He released El Último Tour del Mundo, the first Spanish-language album to hit #1 on the US Billboard chart. It was history. An artist once dismissed as too underground had conquered the global stage, without changing his language, his culture, or his soul. He didn't just represent Puerto Rico. He represented every artist told they had to be something else to succeed. And when he accepted his awards, he didn't speak like a polished celebrity. He spoke like Benito, grateful, raw, unfiltered. He said, "This is for everyone who dreams differently." But dreams come with shadows. The larger his fame grew, the more distant his peace became. He started avoiding parties, skipping interviews, craving silence more than applause. Because success, he discovered, is not a place you arrive, it's a storm you learn to navigate. He began searching for balance, the line between art and self, chaos and calm. He started reading again, painting, spending more time with his family. He took breaks from social media, not because he was tired of fans, but because he was tired of pretending. He learned that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was healing. He was becoming a man, not just an artist. Still, the machine of fame never stops turning. Contracts, tours, sponsorships, all demanded more. And sometimes, saying no felt impossible. He'd look at his team, at the expectations, and think, what happens if I stop? But deep inside he knew, stopping wasn't failure. Stopping was sanity. He didn't know it then, but this was his initiation, the passage every great artist must face. The moment when the dream becomes too loud, and you either lose yourself or learn to dance with the storm. Benito chose to dance. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but authentically. He channeled his exhaustion into art, turning turbulence into creativity. And from that decision, a new version of Bad Bunny was born, stronger, more mature, less afraid. The storm of success had not destroyed him. It had refined him. He learned that the world doesn't reward those who shout the loudest. It rewards those who stay true, even when the wind howls against them. And though the spotlight can burn, it can also illuminate, if you remember who you are. The boy from Vega Baja was still there, somewhere beneath the designer clothes and flashing lights. He was still whispering melodies, still dreaming of peace, still chasing meaning beyond fame. Because for Benito, success was never the destination. It was the storm that taught him how to stand in the rain, unafraid, unapologetic, alive. The storm had passed. But in its wake, new questions began to rise. Who was he beyond the fame? Beyond the mask? Beyond the music? He used to make music because it felt like breathing. Now, some nights, it felt like drowning. The meetings, the contracts, the deadlines, the rhythm of creation replaced by the rhythm of demand. The same world that once ignored Benito was now pulling him in every direction. Success had built him a throne. But every throne, he realized, comes with invisible chains. After El Último Tour del Mundo, the industry wanted more. More hits. More collaborations. More everything. Executives called daily with promises disguised as praise. They wanted to shape him, polish him, repackage him, multiply him. But Benito had never been comfortable being multiplied. He didn't want to be a machine that produced music. He wanted to be a man who felt it. Every decision became a battlefield. Creativity versus commerce. Instinct versus instruction. He'd sit in boardrooms while men in suits discussed algorithms, demographics, brand synergy, all the sterile vocabulary of art-turned-business. He'd listen in silence, nod politely, and think, this is not why I started. He remembered nights in Vega Baja, recording with a $10 microphone. Back then, there was no pressure, no expectations, only possibility. Now there were sponsorships, contracts, numbers that determined worth. He began to see the cracks in the machine that powered the music world. The same system that celebrated individuality also tried to control it. It wanted his sound, his style, his rebellion, but only in a way that sold. And that contradiction began to eat at him. There was one meeting that changed everything. A label executive told him, "Benito, we need another summer hit. Something safe, something fun. No politics, no sadness." He smiled politely, then stood up. "If I make the same thing again," he said, "I'll stop being me." That night, He drove alone through San Juan. The rain fell hard, streetlights flickering on the wet pavement. He rolled down the window, letting the water hit his face. And in that moment, he made a promise to himself. If the industry was a machine, he would be the glitch that exposed it. So he changed the rules. Instead of chasing singles, he made albums that told stories. Instead of perfect choreography, he danced like chaos. He released songs that didn't fit radio formulas, videos that confused marketers, lyrics that defied translation. He stopped trying to please and started trying to speak. Each album became a manifesto of freedom. Each decision, a declaration of independence. And to the machine's surprise, the world loved it even more. He proved that authenticity sells better than conformity. He became a walking contradiction, the rebel who topped charts, the outsider who defined the mainstream. But rebellion is lonely. He'd go home after award shows, trophies shining on the table, and feel nothing. He wasn't ungrateful. He was tired. Every victory seemed to come with a cost, another piece of his peace. He began to ask deeper questions. What does success mean if it silences your soul? What good is fame if it kills the joy that created it? And when those thoughts became too heavy, he turned them into songs. His writing changed. Less noise, more truth. He wrote about exhaustion, about disillusionment, about the quiet war between art and industry. Tracks like Yanaguni and A Tumor Said weren't just hits, they were confessions. Every lyric dripped with fatigue and freedom intertwined. Fans felt it. They sensed the humanity beneath the superstar veneer. He wasn't pretending to be unstoppable anymore. He was showing the cracks, and that made him more real than ever. He started taking creative control over everything, directing videos, designing covers, crafting visuals that looked nothing like the industry expected. He blurred genres, mixed trap with bolero, punk with reggaeton, silence with chaos. Critics didn't know how to categorize him. That was the point. He didn't want to be understood. He wanted to be felt. Because true art doesn't explain itself, it confronts you. At press events, they kept asking him the same thing. What's next? What's the secret? How do you stay at the top? He'd smile and say, by not trying to. It wasn't arrogance. It was wisdom. He had learned that chasing relevance is the fastest way to lose authenticity. So he started disappearing more often, ghosting social media, skipping public appearances, recharging in silence. He'd spend days at the beach, surfboard in hand, letting the waves remind him of rhythm without pressure. He wasn't running from fame. He was returning to Benito. In those quiet moments, he found what the machine could never give him: peace. He realized that the music industry is a paradox. It feeds on creativity but fears originality. It worships artists, then demands they become predictable. And the only way to survive is to remember that the machine needs you more than you need it. That realization became his new power. He wasn't a product anymore. He was a presence. And presence, unlike fame, cannot be manufactured. When he released Un Verano Sin Ti, it was more than an album. It was liberation disguised as melody. A love letter to Puerto Rico, to peace, to simplicity. A reminder that joy, too, can be a form of rebellion. And as the world danced to his songs, Benito stood watching quietly, knowing that for the first time in years, the music truly sounded like him. No filters. No formulas. Just feeling. He had won a war most artists never survive, the war against becoming a machine. And in that victory, he discovered something deeper than success: balance. The boy who once sang behind a supermarket counter had faced the might of the industry and refused to lose his humanity. He had proven that art can exist without permission, that truth can coexist with fame. But every revolution leaves scars. And though he had conquered the machine, another challenge loomed, one that couldn't be fought with music, only with meaning. He had regained his freedom. Now, he would learn how to use it. Every artist has a moment when their voice stops belonging only to them. For Benito, that moment came when Puerto Rico began to cry out, and he could no longer stay silent. He had already conquered the charts, defied the industry, and reclaimed his art. But now, something larger was calling him. Not a brand, not a label, but his island. The same land that raised him was in pain, and he knew music wasn't enough. It was time to use his voice for something bigger than himself. In 2019, the air in Puerto Rico grew heavy with anger. Corruption scandals, economic collapse, power outages. The island was tired of being forgotten. And when secret messages leaked, exposing the mockery of its people by those in power, the streets erupted. Thousands filled San Juan, waving flags, shouting in rhythm, turning protest into poetry. Among them, hidden under a hoodie and sunglasses, walked Benito. He wasn't there as Bad Bunny. He was there as Benito Martínez Ocasio, son of Vega Baja, one of the crowd. But fame has a way of finding you, even in anonymity. When people recognized him, the energy changed. The chants grew louder. The movement found its pulse. Because when one of the most famous artists in the world showed up to march beside his people, the message was clear: this isn't about celebrity. This is about conscience. A few days later, the world watched as Benito stood atop a truck in the middle of the protests. Microphone in hand, sun burning above him, he began to sing. Not a hit, not a single, but a call to action. His lyrics carried fury and hope in equal measure. His voice echoed through the streets like thunder rolling over the Caribbean. He wasn't performing. He was testifying. And the people responded like a choir of revolution. The videos spread across the internet. Millions of views in hours. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local movement. It became global. Puerto Rico had found its anthem, and its singer was a man who once bagged groceries. He didn't plan it. He didn't script it. He just felt it. Because art without truth is decoration, and he had never been interested in decoration. That protest changed him. After the governor resigned, the world celebrated, but Benito felt something deeper, a sense of responsibility. He had always been proud of his island, but now he understood what it meant to carry its pain, its pride, its voice. From that moment on, his art began to shift. His lyrics grew heavier, more reflective. He started using his platform to speak on everything: identity, injustice, equality, mental health. He didn't shout for attention, he whispered with conviction. Because truth doesn't always need volume, just courage. He released songs that spoke to the heart of his culture. In Estamos Bien, he sang not about wealth, but resilience. In El Apagon, he celebrated Puerto Rican pride while exposing colonial wounds. In Andrea, he told the story of a woman silenced by violence, and gave her name power again. Every track became a mirror, reflecting the beauty and the bruises of his people. He was no longer just a voice from Puerto Rico. He was the voice of Puerto Rico. But carrying a nation on your shoulders is a heavy burden. For every person who praised him, another criticized him. They said he should stick to music, avoid politics, stay neutral. But neutrality, Benito knew, was the language of fear. And fear was something he had already defeated. He once said, "If you have a voice, use it. Silence helps no one." That simple philosophy became his compass. It guided every performance, every decision, every statement. When hurricanes hit the island again, he donated quietly, no press, no announcement. When young artists struggled for visibility, he gave them features, mentoring them behind the scenes. He wasn't looking for credit. He was looking for change. In interviews, people asked him how he balanced fame and activism. He would smile and say, "They're not separate. My music is my protest." That's what made him different. He didn't lecture. He inspired. He didn't speak at people. He spoke for them. Through every verse, he was building bridges between generations, between cultures, between the forgotten and the celebrated. He proved that an artist can be both entertainment and enlightenment. But even the strongest voices need rest. And as his influence grew, the expectations became overwhelming. Everyone wanted a statement, a solution, a song. And sometimes, even the loudest voice needs silence to stay honest. He returned to Puerto Rico often, seeking peace in the same waves that once inspired him. He would sit by the shore, headphones off, just listening to the world without rhythm or applause. That silence reminded him of why he started, not for fame, not for money, but for meaning. And every time he returned to the studio, he carried that silence with him, translating it into art that spoke louder than words. By the time Un Verano Sin Ti was released, it felt like a homecoming. Not just for him, for his entire culture. It was warm, nostalgic, tender, filled with the soul of an island that refused to die quietly. It broke streaming records, but more importantly, it broke barriers. For the first time, the sound of Puerto Rico was the soundtrack of the world. The boy who once sang alone in Vega Baja had become the heartbeat of a nation, not because he wanted power, but because he spoke truth. His success was no longer personal. It was collective. When he won, his people won. When he sang, his island breathed. He had become more than an artist. He had become a mirror, one that reflected the pain, pride, and passion of millions. And yet, deep inside, he knew this journey wasn't over. Every cause, every stand, every truth he spoke came with sacrifice. And now, as the world crowned him a hero, he began to ask himself the hardest question of all. How do you stay real when the world wants to turn you into a saint? He had found his purpose. But purpose always comes with a price. Every performer eventually meets a moment when the stage begins to feel like a mirror. For Benito, that mirror arrived not in a concert hall, but on a movie set. He had spent years mastering rhythm, commanding sound, building worlds with lyrics. But acting, that was different. In music, he could hide behind beats. In acting, there was nowhere to hide. The mask he had built, the sunglasses, the style, the armor of Bad Bunny, would have to come off. And beneath it, the man would have to face himself. Hollywood had come calling. Offers, scripts, producers, everyone wanted a piece of the phenomenon. At first, he laughed it off. He was a musician, not an actor. But curiosity, that restless part of him that always chased growth, began to whisper. What if performance could be another form of truth? What if the camera could capture what the microphone couldn't? So he said yes. His first roles were small, cameos, experiments. But even those moments carried weight. He didn't want to pretend on screen. He wanted to be. And that difference made directors look twice. When he landed a role in Bullet Train alongside Brad Pitt, the world called it a debut. But for him, it felt more like a confession. Each scene forced him to confront emotions he had buried under years of fame. Anger, regret, loneliness. Things he could only hint at in lyrics were now staring back at him through the lens. He remembered standing in front of the camera, eyes fixed, heart pounding. He wasn't thinking about fame or image or fans. He was thinking about Vega Baja, about the boy who had once been told he'd never make it past the island, about how far that same boy had traveled, and how close he still felt to the one he used to be. Every take became an act of reflection. He wasn't just playing a character, he was rediscovering his own humanity. When the movie premiered, critics praised his performance, raw, magnetic, unpredictable. But behind the applause, Benito felt something unexpected, peace. Because for the first time, the performance wasn't about proving himself. It was about feeling himself. That same year, he stepped deeper into fashion. Runways, Met Gala appearances, magazine covers. Not as decoration, as declaration. Every outfit, every pose, every color challenged a world still obsessed with definitions. He blurred masculinity and femininity like paint on a canvas. He didn't want to destroy stereotypes. He wanted to dance around them until they dissolved. Because for him, freedom wasn't rebellion, it was honesty. He once said, "Fashion lets me say things I can't say in words." And the world listened. For many, he became an icon. For others, a controversy. But for those who understood, he was a revolution wrapped in fabric. Success surrounded him like smoke. Albums, movies, awards, covers. The world couldn't get enough. Yet inside, he felt a strange stillness. He began to realize that every new victory brought him closer to an old truth. That the spotlight doesn't reveal who you are, it reveals what you're still hiding. There were nights when he'd look in the mirror and ask, "Am I living my truth or performing it?" That question haunted him, because the line between the artist and the act was beginning to blur. He started spending more time alone, away from the endless flashing lights. He'd drive the coastal roads of Puerto Rico at night, windows down, wind in his hair, radio off. Just listening. Not to music. To silence. Because silence, he had learned, is the only sound that tells the truth. He wasn't running from fame. He was searching for authenticity. For the voice that existed before microphones, before charts, before anyone called him Bad Bunny. He began journaling again, handwritten notes, reflections, fragments of lyrics. Pages filled with questions. What is success without peace? What is art without honesty? What is love without freedom? Those words would later shape his next creative chapter. Not just another album, but a meditation on identity, purpose, and the cost of transformation. When he spoke about acting in interviews, he said it had humbled him. That the camera didn't care about followers or fame, only truth. That acting, like music, was another mirror. And in that mirror, he saw something fragile yet powerful, himself. He had spent years building an image strong enough to inspire others. But now he realized that real strength wasn't in the mask. It was in the vulnerability beneath it. Every performance, every photo shoot, every award became less about proving he could do it, and more about proving he could feel it. Because to be human, he realized, is to evolve. To reinvent. To begin again. Benito had learned how to balance two worlds, the dream and the reality, the art and the reflection. He had become both performer and philosopher, artist and advocate. The stage was no longer his cage. It was his mirror. And yet, as peaceful as he appeared, there was still an undercurrent of fatigue. The fame, the pressure, the constant reinvention. It was all beautiful, but it was heavy. He knew another transformation was coming. Not a creative one this time, but a personal one. Because success, fame, and art had given him everything, except simplicity. And that was what he now longed for most. He didn't know it yet, but soon he would confront the one opponent he could never outshine, never outrun. Himself. He had learned to master rhythm. He had learned to master fame. But mastering peace, that would be his next challenge. He had faced the mirror and seen both the man and the myth. Now, the reflection would start to crack. There's a kind of silence that follows greatness, the kind that feels louder than any applause. For Benito, that silence began to grow after the world had given him everything. The stages, the awards, the endless recognition, they all began to blur together, like lights on a highway after midnight. He had reached the summit of fame. But from the top, the air felt thinner. And sometimes when he looked down, all he saw were shadows, shadows cast by his own light. Every artist dreams of being seen. But no one tells you what happens when everyone is watching. The fame that once felt like validation now felt like surveillance. Every gesture, every post, every lyric was dissected, praised, criticized, misunderstood. He couldn't go to the beach without a crowd. He couldn't eat in peace without a phone recording him. Even silence became a headline. And for a man who once found freedom in expression, being watched began to feel like being caged. He loved his fans, truly. He always said they were the reason he existed as Bad Bunny. But the noise became overwhelming. There were moments when he missed the anonymity of the grocery store, the quiet rhythm of the checkout beep, the simplicity of being unseen. Fame, he learned, doesn't just magnify your success, it amplifies your loneliness. The tabloids started following him everywhere. Rumors, controversies, endless gossip, most of it fabricated, some of it real, all of it exhausting. He had become not just an artist, but a commodity. His face sold headlines, his name sold attention. And attention, he realized, is the most dangerous drug of all. It feeds you, praises you, defines you, and when it's gone, it starves you. So he started retreating. Fewer interviews, fewer appearances, more nights alone, searching for the voice that fame had drowned. In that solitude, he began to write again. Not for charts, not for fans, for himself. The words were quieter this time, stripped of glamour and rhythm. They spoke of exhaustion, of identity, of the strange emptiness that comes when you've achieved everything and still feel incomplete. He once wrote in his notes, "When you reach everything you wanted, what do you dream about next?" There were days when he questioned everything. Was the fame worth the peace it took? Was the voice worth the silence it demanded? He loved his art, but he began to wonder if the price was too high. His friends noticed the change, quieter, more introspective, less driven by the chaos that once defined him. He wasn't depressed. He was evolving. For the first time, he was asking questions not as Bad Bunny, but as Benito. He began to travel alone, sometimes disappearing without telling anyone. No entourage, no security, no cameras. Just a backpack and a need to feel normal. He'd walk the streets of distant cities, unrecognized under a hoodie, ordering food at small cafes, sitting by the sea at night. It wasn't escapism. It was survival. He realized that fame doesn't create who you are. It reveals who you've always been, and exaggerates it. Every flaw, every insecurity, every wound becomes magnified under the spotlight. The same vulnerability that made him powerful in music became the source of his pain in fame. But even through the fatigue, there was gratitude. He never complained publicly. He understood that millions would trade places with him in a heartbeat. Still, gratitude doesn't erase struggle. Even the brightest stars need darkness to remember they're real. And so he started embracing his humanity again, through small things. Waking early, watching the sunrise, calling old friends, writing letters to people he missed. He wasn't trying to escape success. He was trying to live inside it without losing himself. Then came the album Un Verano Sin Ti. To the world, it sounded like joy, tropical beats, love songs, summer nostalgia. But to Benito, it was therapy. It was healing disguised as rhythm. Behind every melody was a man learning how to breathe again. The record became the soundtrack of the world. And yet, even at its peak, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt peaceful. Because for once, he had made something purely from the heart, untouched by industry, expectation, or fear. He learned that you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes, the softest songs carry the deepest truths. But even peace is fragile. The machine of fame doesn't stop, and the eyes never close. When controversies appeared, a misplaced phone, a misunderstood gesture, the internet turned its gaze once more. Suddenly, the same people who worshipped him began to criticize him. That's when he realized, you are never truly loved by the crowd. You are only temporarily adored. He stopped reading comments. He stopped explaining himself. He started protecting his silence like a treasure. And that silence became his sanctuary. He would say later, you can't control how people see you. You can only control how much you let them in. It was wisdom forged in solitude. He no longer wanted to be everywhere. He wanted to be present. To live moments without recording them. To listen without needing to reply. To simply exist. Because that, he realized, is the ultimate rebellion in a world obsessed with noise, to be still. Fame had given him the world, but it had also forced him to confront his own soul. The shadows it cast were not curses. They were lessons, reminders that even light needs contrast to shine. He wasn't broken. He wasn't lost. He was simply human, learning to balance the weight of a name that had become bigger than himself. And in that balance, he found wisdom. He learned that true success isn't standing in the spotlight. It's standing in the shadows and still knowing who you are. He had survived the noise and learned to listen to the silence. But the story wasn't over. He had traveled the world. Sold out stadiums. Broken records. Changed culture. And yet, when he came back home, to the small streets of Vega Baja, it felt like he had never truly left. Because fame fades. Fashion fades. Even music fades. But home stays. The neighbors still called him Benito. Not Bad Bunny. Not superstar. Just Benito, the kid who used to hum in the church choir and dream too loudly for his size. He walked those same streets quietly, head down, hoodie up, breathing in the air that raised him. It smelled like salt, like asphalt, like memory. Every corner reminded him of the boy who started all this, the boy who sang into the darkness hoping someone would hear. And now, the world had heard. But he wasn't chasing their noise anymore. He was chasing peace. In the quiet of his home, he began to reflect on everything. The victories, the mistakes, the noise, the silence. He thought about how music had given him a voice, and how that voice had become something bigger than him. He had sung about pain, love, rebellion, and pride, but underneath it all, he had been telling one story, the story of becoming. He realized that fame doesn't define you. It only magnifies what was already inside. And for Benito, that was compassion, empathy, humanity. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't an icon. He was a man who refused to pretend he was perfect. And maybe that's what made him timeless. He started journaling again, filling notebooks with thoughts, sketches, plans. He wrote about the future, not as a star, but as a person who wanted to live a full, honest life. He dreamed of producing new artists, giving others the same chance he once prayed for. He dreamed of more acting, more expression, more exploration. He even dreamed of stepping away, not to disappear, but to breathe. He began to understand that legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about leaving something that continues to breathe long after you're gone. He once said, "If I stop making music, I'll still create. I can't live without creating." It wasn't a statement of ambition, it was confession. Because creation for him wasn't about fame or followers. It was survival. It was the only language he ever truly spoke fluently. And yet, for the first time, he wasn't creating for the world. He was creating for himself. For the child who never stopped dreaming. For the man who finally learned to rest. He spent time with his family again, cooking, laughing, living quietly. He surfed, he watched sunsets. He let the ocean remind him that everything comes in waves. Fame, pain, joy, all of it, just waves. And like the sea, he learned to move with them, not against them. He no longer needed to prove anything. Not to labels. Not to fans. Not to himself. Because the journey from Benito to Bad Bunny and back again had taught him that the truest art isn't rebellion or performance, it's peace. Sometimes, at night, he'd sit outside, looking at the stars over Vega Baja. No cameras. No applause. Just the hum of insects, the whisper of waves, and his own heartbeat. He'd think about that boy who once uploaded songs to SoundCloud without expecting anyone to care. He'd smile and whisper, "We did it." Not as a boast, as gratitude. Because it wasn't luck that brought him here. It was faith. Faith in himself. Faith in the message. Faith in the idea that art can heal, not just others, but the artist too. He had lived 1,000 lives in one. Singer, actor, activist, symbol man. And now, as the noise of the world began to fade behind him, he understood something profound. You don't need to escape who you were to become who you are. You just have to listen long enough to remember your own rhythm. His story wasn't about fame. It was about transformation, about daring to be different, to feel deeply, to stay real in a world that rewards pretending. The music may change. The spotlight may dim. But the essence, the truth of who Benito is, will never fade. He was never just a trap artist. Never just a pop star. He was a mirror, reflecting a generation that refused to apologize for being themselves. He turned chaos into poetry, pain into rhythm, silence into sound. And as the final notes of his story echo into eternity, one thing remains clear. He didn't just create music. He created permission. Permission to be different. Permission to be honest. Permission to exist without disguise. The world knew him as Bad Bunny. But Puerto Rico will always know him as Benito. The boy who turned dreams into echoes, and echoes into an anthem. And somewhere, even now, the sea still hums his melody. Soft, defiant, eternal. In the end, he wasn't trying to be a legend. He just wanted to be heard. And in that honesty, he found immortality. Bad Bunny's story isn't about beats or fame. It's about defiance wrapped in rhythm, about a generation learning to exist without permission. Asterisk, maybe your story is the same. Maybe you're the next voice waiting behind the noise. Remember, the world doesn't need another copy. It needs your sound, raw, imperfect, real. Because one honest voice can echo louder than 1,000 empty songs.